In Tasmania, wages rose over the year to the December quarter by 3%, which was higher than in any other state. And indeed, for most of the last 5 years, wages in Tasmania have been rising at a slightly faster pace than the rest of the country, although they're still lower on average than they are in other parts of the country. The problem that's actually quite acute in Tasmania is that, as the CPI figures that came out about 3 or 4 weeks ago show, the cost of living in Tasmania has risen by 4.5%. So in real terms, wages have fallen by about 1.5% over the past year, and I guess that's something that an increasing proportion of people are very conscious of.
Well, that's what I was kind of getting at. I mean, Tassie wages falling, 1.5% 2021, and then the Tasmania's wage price index rise 3%. The consumer price index increased by around 4.5%.
4.5.
Yeah, 4.5%. I mean, realistically, we can all spruik these figures and just go, yeah, great. But essentially, because of the cost of living, Tasmanians really are getting poorer and poorer, realistically.
Well, we're still the poorest state in the country by most measures, and that is the result of a smaller proportion of Tasmanians than of any other state having jobs, a higher proportion of those Tasmanians who do have jobs working part-time rather than full-time, and thirdly, for each hour that Tasmanian workers work, they produce less by way of the value of goods and services than workers in other states. That is to say, our productivity is about 10% lower than the national average, and I've argued for more than 25 years that a common factor in all of those three shortcomings is our lower levels of educational attainment. So I've been saying for more than 20 years that if we want to narrow the gaps in our living standard between Tasmania and the rest of the country, and I'm not pretending we can eliminate them entirely. For example, we can never be Western Australia because we don't have their endowment of minerals. We can't be as rich as New South Wales or Victoria because we don't have a big 3 million plus population centre that can serve as a basis for a large finance sector or professional services sector, which are full of high-paying jobs. So we can't be that. But I think we could aim to be richer than Tasmania or than South Australia or Queensland, for example, and we're still a long way short of both of those. But a critical part of getting to where, say, South Australia and Queensland are in terms of average incomes would be having higher levels of educational attainment. And yes, sadly, no one wants to do any of the things that would lead to higher levels of participation in education and attainment whilst you're there. And as a result, I am very pessimistic that Tasmanians will, in my lifetime, be able to have the same sort of average incomes that people in, say, South Australia or Queensland do, let alone in New South Wales, Victoria or WA.
So we'll remain the lowest paid in the nation, Saul?
Well, unless we can improve our productivity and our employability, and I just simply don't believe we can do that until we do a better job of educating those who are entering the workforce as they come out of the schooling system and the education and training systems, or we can attract more talented people who will work themselves at good wages and maybe start and run businesses that employ other Tasmanians. And we were doing some of that in the years prior to the onset of COVID, and it may well be that as hopefully life returns to something approaching normal again and our borders are open and people will think we've done a good job in managing COVID, which by and large I think we have, and that we're a good place to be in an era of dangerous climate change, those sort of things might help attract more talented and productive and high-earning people to live in Tasmania. But that's not going to do much for those of us who are already here and are struggling to get a sort of income that will allow them to maintain their standards of living in the face of ongoing rises in the cost of living. I'm all in favour of having better systems of scholarships to assist people to go to university, although our system of student loans, where you can actually go to university without paying fees up front. Yes, you do incur debt when you do that, but the rate at which you pay back that debt is governed by the income you earn, and the interest rates on it are pretty low. People do have the capacity under our system to go to university without significant financial resources, and if they do get a high-paying job, well then yes, they pay the cost of that back. If they don't, then they're not under the same financial obligation. In addition to the point that your caller from Latrobe made, what I'd say is our failing starts much earlier than entry into university. The evidence, as I understand it, tells me that Tasmanian kids aged 3 or 4 are no less capable of learning than their counterparts in other states and territories. Indeed, the one thing Tasmania does actually well is that a higher proportion of Tasmanian kids go to kindergarten than in other states and territories, and that prepares them well to start their learning journey. But all the other evidence is that the longer our kids stay in the education system, the further behind their peers in other states they fall. And then we have this huge failing uniquely to Tasmania, that our government high schools, and in the southern part of Tasmania, the Catholic high schools, stop at year 10. And if you want to go on to year 11 and 12, you have to go to a separate college. The colleges do a reasonable job of teaching the kids who go to them, but it's an expensive way of delivering year 11 and 12 education, because you've got to duplicate all the administrative staff and the senior teaching staff and the infrastructure and the like. And the existence of separate colleges acts as a barrier to kids, especially those who come from families where there isn't a tradition of going on to a full secondary education, or for whom learning is, all sorts of reasons, difficult. And this is why, as some figures out this week again confirmed, that the proportion of Tasmanian kids at year 10 who go on to year 12 is something like 8 to 10 percentage point below the national average, and always has been. And this is a huge problem. But if our system was so good, we've had it for more than 50 years, if our system of separate colleges is so good, how come no other state or territory has copied it?